Hey, good afternoon. I'm a little late starting, sorry. It's about 5:10 Central Time. But this is Johnny Wall, and I am continuing to lead this Bible study that we are calling How to Raise Your Children While Raising Yourself. And this is the third part. This is part three. And so I'm looking forward to finishing out maybe this study with you today, depending on what we can get in the next half hour or so. And again, I am conducting this from my front porch. Last time the road noise wasn't too bad, with the exception of a couple of four-wheelers that went whizzing by, and people wanted to know if that was just some really big Louisiana mosquitoes, and no, it wasn't. It was four-wheelers. I live right on River Road, so we have lots of interesting things going up and down the river. Right now we're like way above flood stage, and so it's actually quite a concern because the water is moving really fast, and it's kind of dangerous. So, and I've got a brother and a son that work on the river, so we've been really concerned and praying for them. But if you have listened to the first two, and if you haven't, I really encourage you to, so that this has some context and makes some sense, this Bible study that we're doing, then you know that what I've kind of been leading up to is this week's study, where we're really going to talk practical. What does it look like to raise your kids to be disciples of Christ, to have a disciplined lifestyle, to have the kind of lifestyle within which they have a framework that the other virtues besides just self-control and discipline can operate. Virtues like love and forgiveness and just a love of the truth, all these things that we all want our children to have. And yet I find that many times they lack one of the most basic ingredients in their own character, which is the ingredient of self-discipline. And so what I'm talking about today, what I'm going to talk about, is this whole idea of how to help your children find this, and to help us how we can best help them catch this from the way we're raising them, from the way we're living our own lives. I find a principle in Scripture that there are many times errors on both sides of a scriptural principle, where we can get overboard and off into the ditch in the right or left. And I believe the Spirit of God is there to help us walk a balanced life, a good sort of spiritual common sense type of life, where we don't go overboard with one or the other, but we walk in order and in balance and in wisdom before God. I know that there is a scripture that Jesus told that woman that he met by the well. He says, "Woman, the hour is coming, and it now is, that God is seeking those who will worship him in spirit and in truth." And I find a great balance there. There are people that I have seen, they are so off on the spiritual side that maybe sometimes they neglect the truth side, and that's an unbalanced life. And sometimes they can get a little flaky, where you just have it becomes kind of a feeling directed life, where you feel spiritual, you feel the Spirit, you feel the love of God, and you get so guided by things that you feel, that you forget to be properly instructed by the truth of God. Because without that truth, without the framework and structure that his truth brings, spiritual things just run amok. I'm sitting here about 100 yards from the Mississippi River levee, and in this season the river is up on the levee. That levee wasn't there would be a waterway that brings us much prosperity and commerce, and has so much to do with our way of life down here in this part of Louisiana, could turn into a very destructive force, because it has no guidance, and it's not properly channeled. And so it's kind of that same way. And I know other people who get so off on that other end of truth that, man, they're so into being right and have it right, and they study that Bible, and they know. They really know stuff. And this is great. I'm not knocking it. But if you know stuff, and maybe in all that knowing and all that being right and having it all studied out, you begin to lose touch with the spirit side of it, with the parts that don't always follow rigid rules and regulations, like forgiveness, right, and gentleness and kindness and all these other things that is more of a work of the Spirit than just, oh, well, I got the rule, I got the truth, I got these commandments and all this kind of stuff. And so, so the people who get way off into this truth thing and lose touch with the Spirit and the love of God, they kind of become the Pharisees of the world. They're the hard ones, right? They're so right, and yet maybe their heart is not always right. So we want to walk right down the middle on this thing. And so what we're studying, what I'm trying to get into, is what does this whole disciplined life look like, and what maybe are some tips that you can take and can be useful to you to love your children and to help reproduce this in them. And I'll say in the beginning of this third study, if you don't have kids and you don't think you're interacting with kids much and you just kind of, well, I don't need this, well, please don't, if you turn me off for another reason, but don't turn me off for that reason, because this is something that applies to not just children, but to anyone that you have influence in their lives, and you do, whether you realize it or not. So, without further ado, let's jump into this. So how do I do discipline right? How is it done right? And this is where we left off last time. And number one, the very first thing I'm going to lead off on is you want your child's heart. You want a relationship with your kid. Like, well, that's kind of obvious, isn't it, Johnny? Do you even have to say that? Yeah, you do, because I think there's a tendency in many relationships that we begin to function just in the utility of that relationship. And we do this in our own houses with our spouses. We just sort of function in the specialness and the beauty and the joy and the life that comes from having a relationship with people. Sometimes because of familiarity, it gets old and it gets cold. And we just function. We're functioning, so we think we're doing what we're supposed to, everything's all right. But we've lost the life and the magic that comes from having godly relationships with people. And so you want your child's heart. You want that child more than anything to know that you love them. And he's like, wait, I thought this was a lesson on discipline. Well, it is. But I'm giving you the context of discipline. You take discipline out of this context, and you're going to be those Pharisees. You're going to be those. This is the way a lot of people outside of the body of Christ, outside of Christianity, this is how they see Christianity. And it's because they've run into folks that are real big on functional Christianity. They know the rules, they know the regs, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with godly standards, but if you have that outside of the context of loving people and truly prizing, valuing other people, people can tell if you value them, if you respect them. And if you place great worth on other people, it opens the door for you to minister these other ideas. Things like discipline, and maybe, might even throw some rules in there. Oh my, right? So this is the absolute foundation of raising kids. And last time we read Proverbs, the 23:26, that says, "My son, give me your heart, and let your eyes observe my ways." So the first thing that the writer of Proverbs was saying, that if I have your heart, then what your eyes see, what you learn, will mean something. It'll have impact. It'll have a proper place to go into your life. And perspective. Oh, we need it so much these days. Perspective and balance. And so you must show your children, first of all, that discipline is just a part of love. It's not there for its own sake. It's not there to keep you kids from driving me crazy. It's there because I love you. And I'm inviting you into a fantastic adventure in the love of God that requires this measure of discipline to be properly enjoyed, so that we don't have chaos, so that we don't have the Mississippi River breaking through its banks, something that's usually good and becoming destructive. So there's a scripture in Colossians 3:21 that says, "Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged." So what is Paul saying here? Is he saying, now dads, don't you be disciplining them children because it's going to make them mad? No, that is not what he's saying. If you read the whole Bible in context, that is definitely not what he is saying. But what he is saying is you can do the discipline thing in such a way that your children don't catch the context. They don't catch the idea that all of this is because my mom loves me, my dad loves me. Now look, they're not going to catch it in the moment every time. All right? Bible even says no discipline is pleasant right when it's happening, but later on you see the value, right? So I'm not telling you that you walk around in this paranoid fear that you're hurting your children's feelings because you're administering proper discipline. You don't do that. Quite the opposite. But what I am telling you is you need to kind of do this check often, and check your heart, check your children, and make sure that you're being motivated by this great love, and that in this, and I'm going to talk about specific ways that you do this so that the discipline does come from a heart of love, right? Not from a heart of exasperation or anger and all these other things. And so what Paul is saying is, don't provoke your children to anger and make them discouraged, which means to lose heart. Lose your heart of courage, because the way I'm treated, instead of inspiring me and teaching me how to have self-discipline, instead it just, like, I just sort of give up. I'm just discouraged. And we're going to talk a lot more about that. And then in Ephesians 6:4, a different scripture, he says, "You fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord." Remember we talked about that balance again, from being really wrong one side or the other, and there's this beautiful balance right down the middle. There is a nurture and an admonition of the Lord. It's just how God deals with us. There is a nurture, there is a caring and a love. He chases down he leaves the 99 and goes after that 100th sheep, because he's love, he's love, he's love, he's forgiving, he's after restoration. And yet there is an admonition part of the love of God, where there's discipline, and we're expected to apply some effort and to actually not always get our own way. Hey, how about that for an idea? So all of this goes together. It's wrapped up in a package. So my first point to you is, you want your child's heart. Don't lose your child's heart. And I'm going to tell you, you don't lose it by being a disciplinarian. You don't. You really don't. You lose it by being just a disciplinarian and not having that discipline firmly within the framework of great love. Great love. And look, don't sit around fretting that your children aren't going to know you love them because you're disciplining them. They're really smart. Children are like geniuses about human nature. They just are. In case you don't know me, and this is the first video you've ever watched, my wife and I have raised 9 children. The youngest is 17, the oldest is 36, I think. And I can just tell you from experience, children are really, really clever, and they're pretty manipulative. And so when they see you hesitating and second-guessing yourself because you're so afraid that you're going to mess this thing up, man, they're going to play you. They're going to play you. They're going to play you like a fiddle. So, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Point 2. After point, remember point one was you want your child's heart, and you want to make sure you're always ministering and disciplining from this great love. But point two is that real discipline comes from consistency, not intensity. This is really important. This is one of the ways, one of the things that distinguishes between the kind of discipline that will lose your child's heart and the kind that will keep it. Because, what a lot of folks think is discipline is they let things go, they let it slide until they've just had it to here. And now that they're upset and they've had enough, parent is going to just explode and just let that child have it. Give them a piece of their mind, and it's just, and they call that discipline. They think they're really disciplining their child. Forgive me, but I think that's laziness. Where were you the first 50 times they did that? Let me tell you something. To be consistent with discipline in the life of a child is exhausting. It takes everything you've got and then a little bit more, probably. Because if you're gonna do it right, if you really have a heart to do this thing right, you need to just settle it right now that to be consistent is going to take all of your attention, all of your time. And when you're consistent, you can administer the discipline in small enough bites that it's always under control, it's always godly, you can always do it in a context of love, right? Am I telling you I never lost my temper my whole life of raising kids? No, I'm not telling you that. But I can tell you that what I've learned is the more diligent I am to be consistent about rules, standards, and whatever you've set up for discipline in your own home, the more consistent you are, the more this kind of thing pays off in the long run. So many things in life are just like this, right? If you're 55, 60 years old, and you just decided to start saving for retirement, and I don't feel guilty if that's you, because I know how life goes. I think most of us would recognize, if you're putting a few $100 away every month since you were 20, if there's somebody who's doing that out there, I applaud you. It wasn't me. But I think we all recognize that, when you're diligent and consistent early, that you reap the rewards later, and you keep yourself from having to go to extremes later. And extremes can be dangerous. They can be harmful. And so the power of discipline lies in consistency, not in intensity. We've all seen these little internet memes where they're like, we didn't get whippings, we got hog killings at my house. And I appreciate the humor in that, I really do. But let me tell you, if you've let it go, and all of a sudden you just explode, I don't think that's a healthy form of discipline. And I am for corporal punishment. We're going to talk more about that. So don't save up correction, then explode. You're just venting your anger at your own inconsistency out on your kid. You are also teaching them, and this is tragic, you are teaching them that you are unpredictable, unreliable, arbitrary, and scary. I want my children to understand clearly the context of discipline. That, when they've earned some discipline, they know why. Not that, depending on Dad's mood today, what I'm about to do or say or not do might be okay and it might not. That's not good. That's not healthy. This is not how it's supposed to work, okay? Because consistency brings security to a child. I can tell you that kids that and excuse me for using an unkind term, but kids that we or society or just people in general look at and would say, man, that kid's a brat, a B-R-A-T, a brat. Generally, the reason kids who are brats is they have not enjoyed the security of consistent loving discipline in their lives. And they have no rule over their own spirit. And it isn't just that, I mean, come on, how can a 6-year-old be truly, evil and malevolent and but what they are is they're scared and they're resentful and they're hurting because it is scary and hurtful to a child to have no limits, to have no security, the security that comes with discipline, with rules, with routine. And like I said at the beginning of this point, what I'm describing is not the lazy man's way to raise a family. This is work. That means, man, I was just getting comfortable. I mean, I just sat down, put my feet up, and something happens that, boy, it would be real tempting to just let it slide this time. Yeah, it would. But because I have the understanding and the vision that this consistency is my highest and best calling as a parent, I'm going to get my butt up and I'm going to go take care of that situation. And I'm going to do it in love and try to do it with a good attitude, even though I was really comfortable, right? So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's gonna impose on your time, on your comfort, on the way you want to live your life. But hey, guess what? That's what parenthood does. That's what parenthood is. So the sooner we get that straight in our head and settled in our hearts, the better parents we're going to be. Because parenting's not for cowards, it's not for lazy people, and it's not for wimps. This is what life is built of. And it is your great and high calling to do this. I can tell you this, I've observed this from experience. Each failure to be consistent, each failure to correct, tears down what you have built over 10 instances where you were faithful, where you were consistent. You might think, wait a minute, that's not fair. No, it's not fair. There's a lot of things that aren't fair. And this is one of them. Because I can tell you, it's a lot easier to tear things down than it is to build them up. So every time you're tempted to be inconsistent and let things slide and not work your plan and be consistent with those babies, every time you do that, you're doing way more damage than you are doing good with one instance of doing it right and being consistent and just, being faithful to do what it takes. That's how it works. That's how it's built. So act accordingly. Adjust your heart and your designs and your will to be consistent. Adjust it accordingly. It's what you need to do. Because when you neglect this stuff, it comes back to bite you at a time where it can be too late to repair all the damage. I'm not saying that you're inconsistent and then your child's lost, but I am telling you that there is a beautiful reward to those who work this thing and are not lazy about it. And let me tell you, it's not just the work of getting your butt off the couch or whatever and doing it. It's not just that kind of work. There's an emotional toll that this kind of stuff takes. It takes a huge amount of emotional energy to parent correctly. It just does. And so, you need to learn to take care of yourself. And if you're Christian, the way you do this is you charge yourself with time with God every day. Do it early. Do it before them kids wake up. And I know that's kind of hard because some of them wake up awful early. But, you need to charge yourself up with this emotional energy, with this joy, with this love. You need to go to God. You need to go to the source and get yourself tanked up. Because, parenting is not just sort of this thing we drift through. You've got to be intentional. You've got to be deliberate. And you got to make up your mind what your standards are, and you got to be consistent with them. You got to be loving with them. Because this haphazard business, listen, if I'm describing you, I don't want you to feel all terrible. I want you to feel just bad enough to go to God and say, man, I need to change, right? I need to do better. And God will give you that grace. The Bible says He gives grace to the humble. He resists the proud, right? If you think your way ought to be good enough and you're not open to what God's trying to tell you through His Word, you're going to have a hard row to hoe, and I think your children are going to pay the price for it. But if you're willing to be teachable and say, God, show me, what is in Scripture? What is the scriptural wisdom for raising children, for loving them? And you're open to that, and you're asking for that, God's going to give it to you. He's not going to leave you hanging. And look, none of us are doing this perfect, right? But there is a wise way to walk this out and to wage this war, so to speak. I don't know if that's the right imagery for raising kids. It feels that way sometimes. But, humble yourself. Go to God. Ask for it. So, and some of you might be having this question. I'm still on point 2, right? Remember, point 1 was make sure you have that child's heart. Point 2 is consistency, not intensity. And I usually get these kinds of questions, so I'll just kind of cover them a little bit, because a lot of people want to know, well, what are the standards? What is great discipline? Is great discipline, taking a little paddle and paddling their little behind a little bit? Is great discipline giving them timeouts, putting them in the corner? What works? What's wise? What's good? And it's really funny when I begin to talk about stuff like this with people, because without fail, I usually get that person. Well, let me just back up and tell you, children don't come in one flavor, all right? Like I told you, we got 9 kids, and I can tell you they're all completely different from one another, right? Children come wired for different temperaments. And you got the kind of temperament that can be called the compliant child, right? And I have a few of those. I've had some compliant children where, I raise my eyebrow at them and look at them funny, and they start crying. They're really sensitive to discipline. And you don't have to really kind of go after these guys. They really respond quickly. And I got other ones that you might call the strong-willed child. And I'm telling you, it's not always anything that you did. It's God-given personality, and they come out different. And so invariably, when I start talking about, like specific things that you might do to maybe administer some consequences to a child who has, broken the rules or is being whatever they're being, invariably I get somebody, they got one kid, and that one kid is a compliant child. They just, first time out the oven, they got a kid that was super compliant, and all they ever do to that kid is maybe take a few things away or fuss them a little bit. And, they sit down and have these deep discussions with their little bitty young child and tell them why it was wrong and all this kind of stuff. And so they think they've got the formula for the whole world and for every child type that could possibly arrive in this earth. And it kind of makes me laugh, because, I know it worked for them. And I got people that tell me, corporal punishment, man, that's child abuse. You can't do that to kids. It's just like, dude, do you even have any kids? And if you do, what were they like growing up? Maybe you just had that one or those 2 kids, and they were really compliant children, and all that stuff worked for you, right? Because I can tell you, there are kids, not always boys, but usually boys, that you can sit down and talk to them all you want, brother, but until you're ready maybe to administer a little corporal punishment, you're not getting the kind of attention you need to get from that child. And so what I'm really telling you is you need to be prepared to do what it takes with reasonable and loving standards, right? We don't beat children. We don't grab the nearest thing and start whacking them upside the head and all this kind of stuff, right? If you're talking about corporal punishment, we're talking about extremely reasonable, something to get their attention. And but use your wisdom that God has given you for your child, right? I would never sit here and tell you what you got to do across the board for every child, for everything. But if it helps you and if it gives you some perspective, I can tell you that in my family, whippable offenses. We had 4 of them. Okay? We had 4 whippable offenses. You do these things, there's going to be some corporal punishment administered. And number 1 was lying. I decided early on that telling the truth was going to be one of the highest values for our family. It was going to be a family value for my family, that we told the truth to each other. Even when the truth got you in trouble, got you in worse trouble and hurt, we were always going to tell the truth. So anybody caught lying, that was it. That was definitely a whippable offense, right? I can't remember any mitigating circumstances that ever got anybody out of a whipping for lying, right? And the funny thing is, we didn't have a whole lot of lying going on, all right? Didn't have to do that very often at all. Number 2, disrespect. Now, look, I'm still on point 2, consistency, not intensity, right? So I'm trying to help you understand that being consistent about these things from very early, and never making exceptions, never letting stuff slide, this is how you keep it reasonable. This is how you keep it wise and balanced and loving, right? This is how you keep from going overboard, right? So, but disrespect, big number 2, that was definitely a whippable offense, right? Honestly, 9 kids over 30-something years. I'm thinking real hard, and I hope my memory's serving me right. I don't know if I've given more than a tiny handful of whippings for disrespect. Because, if you're doing a lot of this, you're just not going to have kids in your face. Especially not little kids, throwing these little tantrums and just mouthing off whatever they want to. That's the kind of stuff that needs to be handled early and consistently, no exceptions. And that's one that's when they get too big to whip. And I got kids that could eat apples off my head. They're big guys, right? You're gonna be mighty glad you were consistent early on this kind of thing, because my big old boys who could wrap me up and eat me for lunch, I honestly don't think it occurs to them to get in my face in a disrespectful way. And I'm honored by that, and I'm grateful for that. But that kind of thing comes from consistency, not intensity, right? Consistency, not getting up to here and exploding, but handling all the little manifestations of these things, okay? But I told you we had 4 whippable offenses, right? Lying, disrespect, intentional disobedience, right? And the 4th one was intentionally hurting somebody. Okay, and I think these all make sense. Now notice what's missing from this list, right? You did something childish and irresponsible, and you broke something in the house that was really important to me. That's not on the list, all right? That's when you feel like administering a little corporal punishment. You know what? But you got to be so careful that you need to figure out in advance. You need to get all this stuff settled in your head and your heart. What is important enough for me to lay a hand or a little paddle or maybe a belt if done correctly? What is important enough for me to do this to my child? And I just want to encourage you, it needs to be something profoundly important. If you're whipping your kids because they're on your nerves, I'm not sure you're sending the right message there. If you whip your kids because they broke something being childish, and that something happened to be really expensive or important to you, those are some of the best moments of all to teach your children what is valuable. Who's more valuable? That thing they broke, or them and their heart? Man, don't whip for carelessness. Don't whip for childishness. That's just what kids do. Those are the moments where, you can be angry, you can be honest about your emotions. But those are the times where those children are going to figure out what's important. Am I important? I've told this story a lot of times, and I'll tell it again right now. When I was a young teenager just starting to drive, I fell asleep one night coming home in my mom and dad's brand new 1981 Buick Century, beautiful family car. And I wasn't drinking or doing anything like that. I was just out late, later than I probably should have. And I had a belly full of pizza and root beer, and I was tired. I fell asleep. That car ran into a parked car, and I pretty much totaled that car. And when I called home and I hurt myself a little bit. It wasn't bad. I didn't go to the hospital or anything, but I was a little busted up. And when I called home and had to tell my mom and dad, wake them up and tell them, I think I just totaled your car. That brand new car, a family car of ours, you know. It was a profound moment because my mom and dad, they didn't want to hear about the car. They didn't want to hear none of that stuff. Hey, are you okay? Are you okay? When they showed up, and I wasn't far from home, they drove over there and they had to drive past the totaled car to come get me. And when they showed up, first words out of their mouth, you know, are you okay? They're looking me over, everything okay? And I'm like trying to, you know, they made me feel 10 times worse than if they had really fussed me, because here I am, you know, I was irresponsible and I fell asleep and I totaled this car, and they didn't care about the car. They cared about me. And I knew that way before I was a young teenager, but it really reinforced to me that my mom and dad cared about me. Not just the way my actions and behaviors affected them or made them look or got on their nerves. They cared about me. And I'm telling you, corporal punishment is important, but if you wield it without that fundamental determination that I'm not going to use it to satisfy my anger, I'm not going to use it to vent frustration. And parenting is full of frustration and anger, but that's not supposed to be intertwined with your corporal punishment, right? The fact that you withhold it when you most want to give it sometimes is one of the most powerful things you can do as a parent. One of the most powerful signals you send to your children, that you are what is important, and you are the reason, your well-being, the fact that I love you, is the reason that we do all of this stuff. And not just the corporal punishment, but everything that we do. Those are the most profound messages you send. And so, if this helps you at all, I mean, these are my standards, right? I can't give you chapter and verse out of the Bible for every single one of them, but I believe that they're based on biblical concepts. And to give them to you again, they're like lying, disrespect, intentional disobedience, and intentionally hurting somebody else. Those were the things that we administered corporal punishment for. Everything else we just dealt with, right? And look, I'll tell you right now, and again, this is me, right? You figure out how to run your own family and then apply all these principles I'm giving you of consistency to that. But for me, I'm not a big fan of timeouts, go in the corner, you're punished for this, from this for 3 weeks and all this kind of stuff, because what I end up doing is creating a real pain in the behind for me. I'm punishing me more than I'm punishing the kids, because I got to remember who's punished from what, and I got to deal with all these looks and all this moping and stuff. Let me tell you, when possible and when appropriate, if you can mete out the kind of punishment that happens right then, right there, of which corporal punishment is a great example, it just takes care of it, and everyone moves on. And it makes it much easier to have a house of peace, to have a house full of love and understanding and respect for one another. Things don't fester. You know, every time my kid sees me, he's not thinking, man, I'm still grounded. You know, I'm just not a big fan of that. Now, if that's what you do and it works for you, great. But I'm going to ask you to consider what I'm telling you. That getting things that are wrong, getting them right as fast as you can, including the consequences and punishment. I know that's not always possible, especially when they're older. Sometimes the consequences do need to involve loss of privilege and stuff like that. But dude, if you're taking 3 and 4-year-olds and you're creating punishments that are just long and drawn out, right? And 5 and 6-year-olds, and this punishment, it goes on for a week or 2, You know, what are you doing? You're creating really drawn out and complicated consequences, in my opinion. Uh, and I can tell you that just getting it handled and moving on, I believe it sends all the right signals that yes, there are consequences for your behavior and your attitude, but I'm interested in administering those and getting right back to loving you, accepting you, raising you, delighting in you, my child, and on we go. I think that sends the right messages, and it creates the right kind of security and self-discipline in our children. And that's just how I see it. And I haven't been watching my time, and I didn't bring myself a clock this time. So we got through points 1 and 2. Point 1 was you want your child's heart. Don't lose that. Point 2 was consistency. And we've talked a long time about this. Consistency, not intensity, is the real power of discipline. If you want it to have its desired effects. Now, you can be inconsistent with it, and it'll give you a great vent from your frustration, and it might help you feel better about your anger, but you're not accomplishing what God wants you to accomplish in your child's life. So, all right, I'll just read these. We kind of went over them, but I'll read it the way I wrote it in my notes. Don't whip just because you got irritated, embarrassed in public, or your kid broke something important to you. Teach them that they are more important than stuff. All right? And then finally, we don't whip for carelessness or forgetfulness or irresponsibility or just plain old selfishness. There may be other consequences for things like that. But basically, you know, don't administer corporal punishment for just childishness. I mean, that's just, they're kids. All right? You help them through stuff like that. So hopefully, maybe me relating to you the way we chose to do it, the standards we chose to try to live by when it came to corporal punishment, hopefully that gives you at least a starting point for the kinds of things that you want to think about for your family, for your life, for your home. And I would just ask you maybe to consider the wisdom of those things. And I can just tell you that if you will handle it with great love and a nice little chunk of wisdom thrown in, you can have a home that is beautiful, that is peaceful. You know, sometimes I have people looking at me like, man, you had 9 kids. That must have been, I can't imagine what that home must have been like. And I think to myself, maybe you can't imagine what it was like. It was full of energy and full of noise, but it was the energy of life and love and the noise of joy. And I can tell you, if you get ahead of this thing and you stay on top of it and you use all of your heart and your energy to be inconsistent, it's going to be a delight. I don't believe in terrible twos. I don't believe in horrible teenagers. I have never let that kind of talk come out of my mouth. I don't even like it in joking. And I know a lot of you guys do that kind of stuff in joking, and I'm not trying to make you feel condemned. But because I don't see it that way. 2 years old, one of the most awesome ages there is. We mean terrible twos. The fact that people call it that tells me you're not being diligent to take care of the stuff. Now, is it a lot of work in the twos? Yeah, it's a lot of work. All right? But it's not terrible. This is where you're laying the foundation for beautiful things to come. And teenagers, man, look, I had 5 teenagers at one time. All right, so don't tell me that you don't know what you're talking about, Johnny. You didn't have my teenager. Look, I had 5 teenagers all at one time, and I had 9 at one time or another. And I can tell you that if that's how you look at it, and it's what you're expecting, it's sad. It's just sad to me that that's a mindset that is out there. I believe that faith and love speaks better things and expects better things from our children. Because, man, teenagers are awesome. They're just flat awesome. And I'm getting maybe close, maybe over time. And I told you this might end up being a 4-part. So I think it probably is going to be, because my next 2 points are going to take a little while. But I'll give you a little preview. The next point, point 3, right? Number point one was you need to keep that child's heart above all keeping. It's the most important thing, to have a relationship, not screw up the relationship. Number two, to be consistent. It depends on consistency, not intensity. And three is I want to teach you some ideas about how to not be manipulated and intimidated by your children. Okay? It's a real thing. And like I told you before, man, kids are smart. Oh my gosh, they're so smart. They're smart about relationships. They're smart about manipulation and emotions. And kids figure you out, I think, way earlier than you figure them out. They just do, all right? Because they just lay in there getting that bottle and getting that diaper changed, and they're just watching you. I think they're watching you and figuring you out for that time when they can start messing with you and pushing your buttons and learning how to manipulate you and stuff. It's like, oh, Johnny, how could you say that about those little angels? Okay, if that's what you think. But I'm just telling you. But there's some great, I believe, some scriptural wisdom on how to learn how to have a heart that is full of joy, full of life, and in the kind of strength of character that you need to not be manipulated, not be intimidated by your own children. And if you're listening to this and going, man, who the heck would be manipulated or intimidated by their own children? I applaud you. That's great, because I mean I kind of have the same thought, but I can tell you that there are a lot of people that deal with that, and there are reasons, good reasons, that a lot of people deal with that as a problem in their family. And I want to maybe give you some help with that next time. And one of the big ones is to model the behaviors that you are requiring to model forgiveness, to model gentleness and humility and teachableness. And in fact, that's a great place for me to finish this up, is just a reminder to you that everything I'm teaching, everything I'm encouraging, everything that we do as parents, if it's going to have any virtue and any good thing come out of it at all, it's going to come from God, who is the author. He is the beginning and the fountain of all good gifts in our lives. And so if I'm going to be able to impart something of value to my children, I want God to work it in my heart first. And so let me just encourage you right now, and look, this is not condemnation. Many times in my life, I have looked deep within me and found and come up lacking, and just said, God, I think I'm fresh out of patience today. Can I go back for some more? Right now, I think I'm fresh out of forgiveness and compassion and understanding and empathy, and then all these beautiful things that you want to work in me. So, when I tell you need to go back to God for these things, it's not condemnation. Man, this is life. This is like breathing in and breathing out. It's like saying, well, I just want to exhale. I never want to inhale. Well, good luck with that, all right? If you're going to live a balanced and a healthy Christian life, you got to stop, and you got to go back to God, and you got to replenish yourself. And if you've never made that decision to come to God and ask Him into your life so that you can have a place to go to get replenished, let me encourage you. It's a great time. You can do it right now, right where you are. You don't need to be in a church. You don't need to be any place special at all. I did this myself 30-something years ago, just sitting in my bedroom, a very confused and depressed young man. And I cried out to God, and I said, God, I don't even know if you exist. I'm not even sure about a lot of things, but I am sure of this. I seem to be making a royal mess of my life and relationships and things that are important to me. I don't feel like I'm handling them well, and I need help. I wasn't even that theologically correct kind of sinner's prayer. I didn't go, oh, I'm a sinner and I need your forgiveness and all that. I basically just told Him, I give up. I'm a mess and I need help. It was kind of that blunt. And in His mercy and His grace, that was enough for God, because He wanted me so bad. He met me. He met me way more than halfway. He came a-running to me when I just softened my heart and cried out to Him. And let me encourage you, this is how you get started with God. It's how you get a relationship with God. And it's how you keep walking it out for the rest of your life. It's coming to Him. you come to him for grace. You come to him for forgiveness. We need forgiveness. And it's because he loads me up with love and forgiveness and grace that all of a sudden I discover, wow, I now have a heart that when I dig down deep because somebody's pushing my buttons, or maybe they're just hurting and they need a big load of love and forgiveness and grace, I find, man, all of a sudden, hey, I got that. I got some for you. I got some life for you. I got some forgiveness for you. I think I got some love I can dig down there and bring to you. And it's all because I humbled myself and I went to the source of all those things. And I agreed that I would make whatever adjustments are required in my life to agree with the Creator of the universe and the Redeemer of my soul. I was willing to go to him and do it his way for a change. So let's finish up with some prayer here. Father, I thank you for everyone who was gracious enough to listen, especially all the way to the end here. And I ask you, Holy Spirit, to just make your words come alive in their heart. And if there's anything in here that touched them and it's of you, I pray that you give them the grace to take it and make it something useful and life-giving in their lives. And for everyone that's never really connected with you, Lord, I pray that you will be gracious to them like you were gracious to me 35 years ago. And you made a way to bring me into your family with your great forgiveness and your great love. Thank you for all these things. So until next time, I bless you and I salute you. I honor everything that you do to be a blessing to those around you in your sphere of influence. For those of you who are trying to be great moms and dads and good husbands and wives, God bless you, encourage you. If you need any kind of special prayer, if you think there's anything I got that would help you in the way of wisdom or counsel, I encourage you to reach out. Don't do it in the comments here. Let's keep that kind of stuff private for a lot of reasons. You can reach out to me in messaging and in other ways. But I would be honored if I could somehow maybe pray for you, encourage you. If you think I got anything that would help, you reach out and we'll see what I can do, okay? You guys have a great Monday night. We love you all.